We're thankful that both chambers decided to scale back NC innovation, but the House has been much more aggressive in their proposal.
Welcome to the Debrief, Carolina Journal's weekly recap of major developments in North Carolina politics and public policy. I'm Mitch Kokai, sitting in for Donna King this week, and we're going to be focusing in this program on the state budget, specifically the House budget, but also a comparison between what the House has said and what the Senate said, and maybe a little bit of what Governor Stein has said in terms of what to do with the state budget for the next 2 years. We'd like to know what you think about these budget debates. Be sure to like and subscribe to the Debrief program and leave some comments about what you think. Do you think we covered it well? Are there some things that we missed? We want to know what you have to say. Joining me for this conversation, a couple of people who've been focusing quite a bit on the budget over the past weeks, and especially over this past week. To my left, Brianna Kramer is the legislative reporter for Carolina Journal, who's written several articles about the House budget over the course of the past week. And to my right, Joseph Harris is fiscal policy analyst for the Locke Foundation, taking a magnifying glass to what the House and Senate have been saying in this budget debate. Okay, so let's go ahead now and get to the House budget. Just before we started recording, a final vote for the House, so now it's finalized. It gets to go to negotiations. Brianna, you've been following this very closely. You've written several articles about pieces of the budget starting last week when some of it started to come out in committee meetings. What have been your general takeaways from the House budget?
Yeah, there's been a lot happening this week at the General Assembly, especially on the House side, and they just passed it on Thursday morning in an 86-20 vote. So definitely a lot of bipartisan support for this, which is definitely something to note. It wasn't quite the same on the Senate side for their budget proposal. But on the House side, it seems that they got a lot of Democrats to also support this bill, particularly, I think, because of the pay raises. This is something that Democrats have been pushing for. And then on the House side, we've seen also Republicans wanting better teacher pay and more raises for state employees. So this was an area that I thought definitely differed from the Senate. A lot stronger raises. So when we kind of dive in a little bit, the House wants North Carolina to lead the Southeast in starting teacher pay. So by the end of the next biennium, in the next 2 years, starting teacher salaries would be above $56,000 in the state.
And that's with everything together, right? With the state pay plus a lot of the teachers get these local bonuses.
Yes, exactly. So that would be the base, depending on which county you're working in as a teacher. But that would be a substantial increase. The average increase would be 8.7% in the next 2 years, and that differs a lot from the Senate, where they would give a 3.3% increase over the next 2 years. So large difference there. And then also for state employees, the House budget wants to give them a 2.5% increase. So we saw a large focus in this proposal on state employees and giving them additional raises. So I thought that was something worth noting and something that allowed them to have more support from Democrats.
And I think one of the things I heard Speaker Destin Hall say was that in terms of raises, their proposal was even better than what Governor Stein was calling for.
Yes, he did say that. They had a press conference on Tuesday, the day after it was released, and he was saying that their budget is stronger than Governor Josh Stein and the Senate. So it was something they liked to key on and something they were proud of putting in for state employees.
We're going to get back to some of your assessments of the budget discussion in just a bit, but let's turn now to Joe. You've been combing over this House budget as well. What stood out to you?
Taxes, specifically the personal income tax. So the way it currently sits now is we're at 4.25% for the personal income tax rate, and we will drop down to 3.99% next year in 2026. Under current law, we have 3 additional trigger-based reductions that are possible that would each be 0.5%. So we could potentially go down from 3.99% down to 2.49%.
And before you go on to that, remind us what the triggers are and how they kick in.
Yeah, so the triggers are essentially based on the total revenue that we've collected in the previous fiscal year. And if we hit those triggers, we hit those targets, then we will do the additional 0.5% cut. So the possible cuts are from 399 to 349, then to 299, then to 249. And that is the current law. What the Senate proposed is actually getting rid of 2 of the triggers. So instead of relying on those trigger-based cuts to get us to 2.99%, we would just drop down 0.5% each year, and then by fiscal year 2028, we would be at the 2.99%. So they essentially solidify that additional cut, but then also they add in the potential for some additional trigger-based cuts as well, down to 1.99%. So the overall effect of the Senate's proposal is they guarantee tax cuts down to 2.99 and make 1.99 possible. This is very different from what the House proposed. The House actually proposed keeping all of those triggers in place and actually increasing the size of the triggers to the extent that it would make it very unlikely that we ever get the personal income tax rate below the 3.99%. What the House decided to propose instead was providing an exemption on the first $5,000 of tip wages from the personal income tax. So in effect, the first $5,000 you earn in tips, you don't have to pay income tax on it. They also recommended increasing the standard deduction on income taxes. For example, for a married couple, it would go from $25,500 to $26,500. And they also made one recommendation related to the sales tax. And it is what is called a back-to-school sales tax holiday, where essentially one weekend in August, there would be no sales tax on school-related items.
And we used to have this in North Carolina. It was thrown out, I think, during the time when Republicans were first doing the tax reform a little bit more than a decade ago.
Exactly. It was discontinued back in 2013. And the no tax on tips and the back-to-school sales, break on sales tax, the holiday, they do sound very good politically, right? And I think to the average person, they sound like sound policies that will really help working North Carolinians. But in reality, they're more of symbolic gestures than actually effective tax relief mechanisms. The across-the-board tax cuts that the Senate is recommending would provide literally up to billions of dollars in greater tax relief to North Carolinians compared to the House.
Very interesting stuff. Let's hit on a few more things that are in controversy between now the House and the Senate budget. For those who haven't been following very closely, the Senate passed its budget first. The House has now followed suit. And so what happens next is very likely that the Senate will reject the House's version and they'll go into a conference committee where they'll hash out their differences. So we've talked about the fact that despite the fact there are differences, both of these budgets are about the same size in overall spending. We've talked about the pay raises. One of the things, Brianna, that's interesting on the House side is that some of the ways they get to these pay raises are cutting vacant jobs.
Yes, that's right. Something really interesting. A lot of vacant jobs exist in the state government. Over 10,000 positions remain vacant. So they've struggled to fill some of these positions. So what the House budget proposes doing is telling state agencies to cut 20% of your vacant positions that have been open for an extended period of time. And what they would do with all that excess money is give it back to the state agencies for the 2.5% salary increase and for them to have more flexible funds. So, this is something that has stirred controversy because at the same time, they're getting more money, but they're also cutting jobs. And so there's been a little bit of debate on this, but definitely something interesting that, both sides at the end of the day passed in this budget.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see whether that survives in the final negotiations between the House and Senate. Another thing, Joe, I know you've been focusing a lot of attention on, and you as well, Brianna, is NC Innovation. The two chambers would do very different things on NC Innovation, which is this program that's set up with a nonprofit to help turn university research into profitable products and giving grants to the universities to deal with this. Both budgets would claw back NC Innovation money, but do it in very different ways.
Yes, so we're thankful that both chambers decided to scale back NC Innovation, but the House has been much more aggressive in their proposal. The House would claw back their entire $500 million endowment and then divert all of those funds to the Helene recovery and totally cut ties with NC Innovation. On the other hand, the Senate proposes clawing back the entire $500 million, but then setting aside $100 million, which then they would give back to NC Innovation over the next 4 years through annual appropriations, and they would take the remaining $400 million to help contribute to establishing the new NC Children's Hospital. So the House wants to cut ties completely, give it to Helene, versus the Senate still kind of wants to give them another chance, but they want to change how the organization is funded.
And we've seen that there's been a difference of opinion on this hospital too. He was just referencing the Senate seems to want to put more money into it, and the House says let's scale back some of the money we're giving to this hospital.
Yeah, they're not going to, the House is not wanting to give money to this partnership between UNC and Duke, this children's hospital. But they had a different proposal for what they would do with the money that they would claw back from NC Innovation. And that, they said, will go to Hurricane Helene relief. So that's actually in a new bill that was just passed on Thursday as well on the House floor. Would provide over $450 million to Hurricane Helene efforts. So additional funds on the House side in a different bill, basically transferring that money from NC Innovation to help with Western North Carolina recovery. At the same time, the Senate budget, they included, I believe, $700 million for Western North Carolina, so a substantial amount more within the budget. But basically, at the end of the day, NC Innovation, both chambers want to take a large chunk of the money back. It's just a matter of where they want to send that money to next.
Yeah, and differences of opinion on Helene, both the House and Senate dealing with it in different ways. Governor Josh Stein recently asked for almost $900 million more to deal with Helene, so it'll be interesting to see whether they come close to what he's asking for. I understand both sides are putting money back into the savings reserve. Are there interesting differences, or is it similar in this respect?
In this respect, it's almost identical. Since Helene has occurred, our savings reserve dropped from $4.75 billion down to about $3.6 billion is where we're at now. Both chambers want to put the savings reserve back to the pre-Helene level by allocating over $1.1 billion to get it back to $4.75 billion.
Very interesting. Yes. And I know another piece of the House budget that we haven't yet talked about, but anyone who has to ever go to the DMV would probably be interested to hear about this. They're talking about at least a pilot for privatizing the DMV?
Yeah, that's right. This is something that has, I think, gained a lot of attention because the DMV in North Carolina has had a lot of issues in the past years. There's been a lot of conflict, and we've had a lot of committee meetings at the General Assembly discussing what to do with the DMV, especially as the Real ID deadline has come about. I think a lot of people have realized the long lines are an issue, and how the DMV operates needs to change in one way or another. So within the House budget, they propose a pilot program that would take place in 2 counties in North Carolina to test out what it would take to privatize the DMV with third-party vendors. So really, it would allow some private entity to come in and distribute licenses to North Carolinians. So definitely a unique proposal, something that they're trying to get tackled. And so they put this inside the House budget. I'm not sure where the Senate stands, though, on if they would approve of this pilot program.
Well, it soon will be part of the House-Senate budget negotiations. One other thing, we've already alluded to this, but this is quite interesting. There were a handful of votes in the Senate from Democrats for the Republican written budget, but in the House, quite a few votes from Democrats. I think you mentioned 86-20, the final vote on Thursday. The initial vote on Wednesday, I believe, was 93-20, and within the Democratic caucus, 27 for the budget, 20 against, so a majority of the Democrats. My guess is Speaker Hall and the budget writers were very pleased to see this amount of support.
Oh, I would definitely say so, especially since this is Speaker Hall's first year leading the full House chamber. I think for him, that is something that was a priority, is making sure to work across the aisle. I know that's something Democrats also said they were in communication with Republican leaders, which was a surprise to them before the budget came out a little bit, to be in the discussion process. So I think that was a good thing for Justin Hall as Speaker of the House. But, also surprising because, other parts of the budget, DEI cuts, they're cutting over $10 million in DEI programs in the government. So there were some things that, of course, Democrats aren't in support of, but overall, I think because of the funding aspects of state employees and teachers, that is what probably drew them over the line.
And it'll be very interesting to see how many of those House Democrats will vote for the final version of the budget, because we know that will look much different than what either the Senate or the House have put forward at this point. Any final thoughts we should get in before I get to a statement from the head of the John Locke Foundation?
I would just say key takeaways between the two budgets are that the Senate provides greater tax relief for working North Carolinians. However, the House addresses NC innovation in a much more appropriate fashion.
All right. Well, I've just referenced this. One of the things that is of interest is that the two chambers have kind of different approaches to the budget, and the John Locke Foundation, which oversees Carolina Journal, its CEO Donald Bryson released a statement about the House budget comparing the two budgets, and I'd like to read that for you at this point. He says the competing versions of the 2025 state budget reveal two very different approaches to government accountability and fiscal discipline. The North Carolina Senate's budget plan reflects a more responsible and limited view of government, while the House proposal takes bold steps to correct past mistakes in spending. The Senate's plan deserves praise on several fronts. It holds the line on taxes, avoids new recurring spending obligations, and wisely replaces permanent salary hikes with a one-time bonus, limiting long-term budget bloat. It also eliminates the outdated Certificate of Need, or CON law, and establishes a new DAVE system, the name of the state auditor, Dave Bolick, to evaluate state debt, two significant victories for healthcare access and fiscal transparency. Notably, the Senate plan removes North Carolina's interim carbon emissions target, reducing the risk of rushed and economically harmful environmental mandates. Turning now to the House, at the same time, the House budget takes an important and commendable step by clawing back the full $500 million endowment previously granted to NC Innovation. That move represents a significant win for taxpayer accountability. The House also moves to eliminate unfilled government positions, helping trim the size of the bureaucracy and align state personnel with actual service needs. The budget will inevitably be negotiated between chambers, and we urge budget conferees to adopt the strongest elements of each plan, retain the Senate's approach to taxation, recurring costs, regulatory reform, and climate policy, while incorporating the House's needed rollback of the NC Innovation Endowment, reduction in pork-style capital projects, and elimination of vacant state jobs. North Carolinians deserve a budget rooted in transparency, limited government, and long-term sustainability. With thoughtful leadership, this budget process can deliver exactly that. Once again, the words of Donald Bryson, CEO of the John Locke Foundation, which oversees Carolina Journal, including the Debrief program. Brianna Kramer, Joe Harris, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for joining us to watch the program. We hope you will like, subscribe, do all those things you do on social media, and leave your comments about what the House and Senate have said on the budget. Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Are there parts that you like better than others? And we will be back next week with another edition of The Debrief.
Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch The Debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out carolinajournal.com for the latest breaking news.